biotechnology, martial arts, environments, ninjas, risk and reward, sex appeal. These are the things that come to mind when one thinks of Tecmo's long-running fighting game franchise, Dead or Alive. And believe it or not, there's a story behind it. I'm Osmic, your go-to retro music extender from the 1960s to the current era. And before we go on this long and exciting journey to exploring the lore behind the Dead or Alive series, I want to clear up a few things. Dead or Alive is one of my favorite fighting games of all time, and more specifically, Christy is one of my favorite video game characters of all time. But as much as I love this series, it isn't immune to criticism, and I have my fair share of them, if only because I fear the series is going in a bad direction both as a fighting game and in story. So to all those who do love the series, don't take it personally. At the end of the day, it's just my opinion. I have nothing against certain characters in the series, nor the fans of those said characters. So if you enjoy playing them for whatever reason, that's perfectly fine. For the most part, I can see why the characters of Dead or Alive can be appealing in their own right. But as my video series will soon show, there is room for improvement. And for clarity, I don't mean in gameplay.
Oh dear, this is terrible. Tokyo's really scary.
The purpose of this upcoming video series is to educate fans new and old about the established lore and characters of Dead or Alive and the potential positive direction it could take for the series' future. It is not intended to spew vitriol against the Dead or Alive series, its fans, nor the developers old and new. As such, I humbly ask that you don't use this video nor any others after it as a journalistic weapon for that purpose. However, you can share it with the intention of bringing a more positive awareness to the series. Someone may even learn or appreciate something about the series even more than they did before. With that out of the way, it's time to answer the big question. Why am I doing this series of videos? It boils down to two reasons. The first one should be obvious. I'm a fan of the Dead or Alive series, but it's not only that. The second reason is because, like many other fans, I'm definitely not pleased with how Dead or Alive 6's story turned out, and I fear for its future.
So much I want to see you again.
Oh, gross.
And while bad business practices such as overpriced season passes, reselling non-guest characters as DLC, and most infamous of them all, paid hair color DLC, certainly made a dent in the game's longevity for support by Team Ninja, the game took a hit as far as story goes too. And as far as DOA standards go with story, that's unusually sparse. So where did DOA6 go wrong with the story, you ask? Where do I even begin? First off, the game's story seems to be more centered on the characters who appeared in the last installment, while the latest two feel like afterthoughts in the story.
I have a debt to repay to Miyako. She introduced me to a good job after all.
You know where my mother is?
I cannot say. I was only told to meet with you.
Most of the time. And whom does most of the story focus on? None other than those two cute little new kids on the block, Marie, Rose, and Hanukkah, who Team Ninja is so desperately trying to make the face of the franchise. And the main big bad is Raito, a throwback from the last installment we haven't seen since Dead or Alive 1. Taking all this into consideration, doesn't this already sound like the premise for a story expansion in Dead or Alive 5?
This experiment is nothing more than a stepping stone.
Okay, so some additional characters from Dead or Alive 5 that weren't in the vanilla release got a chance to shine. That's not too bad, right? In most cases, it wouldn't be. If more of them actually did get a chance to shine. Unfortunately, the Fiend Hunters Rachel and Momiji do not get the same treatment. In fact, they're nowhere to be found in the story at all. And to add insult to injury, they're resold in the sequel as DLC, when they have been free in not one, but two major expansions of Dead or Alive 5. Oh, but it gets worse. We still have one more additional new character from Dead or Alive we haven't spoken about, and that's Nyotengu. Now you would think, with as much care as they put into this character's design, while keeping the Tengu playstyle archetype fans have been craving for years, that she would play a huge role in the story of Dead or Alive just by being a gateway character to the yet unseen world of the Tengu. She's majestic, but also has a fun and naughty side to her as well. You could tell Team Ninja put some real effort into making this character work, and had fun with it along the way. Just by looking at her, you can assume she looks like one of the most important characters Team Ninja has created in a long time. So what did they do with such a well-designed character in the story of Dead or Alive 6?
I assume that one who calls herself Yama. Actually, but you see, there's a reason.
They made her a troll. I admit she has her funny moments, but this did little to nothing to make the character more interesting story-wise. She served no purpose whatsoever, and of all the characters she encountered, you would think at least one of them would ask more questions about her and where she came from with those big-ass wings, especially Hayabusa. After all, he was the one who killed the original Tengu on Katsubo in DOA6 2. So wouldn't Hayabusa not want to take any chances keeping her alive? Especially if she's from the very same place that he came from? And wouldn't this be a viable reason that Rachel and Momiji should take part in the story as well?
How foolish.
Okay, so they screwed up the characters of DOA5. They're still the new characters from DOA6. They're still in the story. Shouldn't that be what really matters? Of course they matter, as long as it serves the plot very well. But in Diego and Nico's case, it's very, very lopsided. On one hand, you have a street fighter from New York who joins small-time prize fights to cure his mom's undisclosed illness. And on the other hand, you have a recently recruited scientist from Myst who takes part in a reanimation project in an effort to resurrect the dead, with the ulterior motive of resurrecting her own father, introduces a new, non-generic martial art never before seen in a fighting game, and is able to manipulate lightning with technology to boot. Guess who got top billing? Now you can argue that there were characters that haven't been relevant to the main story before. The Armstrongs have their own side story themselves, where Tina pursues dream after dream after dream. While Bass, being the ever overprotective father he is, shows increasingly excessive concern for Tina. But at least Tina has a childhood history with Lisa, who is currently very relevant to the main story. You can argue that Jan Li and Lei Fang aren't too involved either, and it's mostly about Lei Fang obsessing over defeating Jan Li every second. But lo and behold, Lei Fang eventually befriends Hitomi with the power of cabbage, and Hitomi is involved with the ninjas to an extent. Jan Li has also recently found a new rival in Rig, who is more involved with the main story than he is, whether he likes it or not. And then there's the two elephants in the room that are Leon and Genfu, two characters that have been all but removed from the roster. While Genfu makes more sense, now that Elliot is adapting his moveset into his own while he enjoys retirement, Leon, tell you what, we'll get back to him next year. With all those points made, Diego is probably the most paper-thin character backstory I've seen in a while in DOA. If we had to take the story at face value, he's an unmotivated schmuck who prefers to get by on helping his mom get better through small prize fights, knowing that the DOALORE tournament could tremendously turn his luck around. Not only that, it took not one, but 3 people just to nudge him to go. First there was Zach, then there was Mila, who could have been better written in the story as her childhood friend, and oddly enough, Rig. And why doesn't Diego want to go to the tournament?
For the heat of this place. I have no interest in putting on an act for a bunch of rich jerks.
Really? Really? He couldn't put his pride aside for one damn second to get big money off of a tournament? Now don't get me wrong, he may have his reasons, but they're not exactly shown in the story. It would make sense if he said this to Rig. My dad worked for DOA6 and never came back to check on me or my mom for years. Screw him and screw DOA6! Unfortunately, no information is ever given about Diego's father, much less about him being related to or ever working for DOA6. But at least it would have made his reluctance to join the tournament and his disgust for rich people a lot more convincing. This is yet another sad example of quickly shoehorning a character merely for the sake of appealing to a Western audience. When directly compared with Nico, who was clearly designed to appeal to a Japanese audience, had clear motivations for working with Miss, and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty in the process, all while introducing a brand new, non-generic martial art to fighting games, and harnessing the power of lightning through high technology, the difference is night and day. And of course, there's this flawed attempt to inject the guest characters of King of Fighters into the story in a way that makes sense the same way they did Virtual Fighter in DOA6 5. The problem? The plot hole is as big as Mai's cleavage. In Kula's chapter, we cut to Nico's lab, where she's conducting an experiment on dimensional travel, which proves successful as the childlike member of the Nest Trio is transported into DOA with all her ice powers intact.
あれれれれ、みんなどこ？待っていました。誰？あ、もしかしてあなたレストの人？論外です。
Now we go to Mai's chapter and hold on a minute. I don't see a portal. Where's the portal? Where's the portal, damn it? How is it that Kula, who comes from the same world as Mai Shiranui, has to go through a dimensional portal to get to DOA world, but Mai doesn't have to? Say what you will about DOALORE 5's jumbled timeline of a story mode, but at least there was some consistency there. Team Ninja clearly wanted to integrate Virtual Fighter characters into their own shared world. No dimensional portals required. Why break that consistency if you wanted to integrate KOF characters into the story as well, especially when it was Mai Shiranui that inspired the famous 3D jiggle physics for DOA? None of this prepared me, though, for the end chapters of DOALORE 6. It turns out the main reason Victor Donovan conducted this reanimation experiment was to revive Maria. Yes, that very same Maria that is the mother of Elena Douglas. And given his reaction to her reanimated body, it suggests that he has lusted for Maria for a very, very long time.
How much I want to see you again.
Oh, gross.
So let me get this straight. You mean to tell me that everything that Victor Donovan has been doing since the first DOA, hiring Bayman to kill her husband, hiring Christie to kill her daughter, creating 1 billion Kasumi clones, and now this reanimation project, was all just to covet someone he knew he could never have? It sounds like a cop-out, and it diminishes Donovan as a villain. From the beginning, Victor Donovan was a cold and calculated man shrouded in mystery. The players were led to believe he was an intimidating force that constantly looms like a shadow over the ninjas at every turn. And after all these sequels, this is his payoff? He was so horny for his former partner's dead wife that his endgame was to reanimate her into his personal consort? Where was he when Christie accidentally shot her at the Opera House instead of Elena, who was the intended target? Why didn't he ghost her the way he ghosted Bayman if he cared so much for Maria?
Christie, it's Bayman. Christie, come in.
Ignore it. Maintain course for HQ.
Roger.
Do you see now why DOA6's story is significantly more problematic than recent entries? Do you now see the inconsistencies with how they integrate guest characters into their story compared to DOALORE 5? Sure, the ninjas are still involved in the main plot at the end of the day, but that doesn't really help much to alleviate the flaws. And even then, they feel like secondary characters being forced into a battle against the big bad, who, let's face it, feels more like a mid-game boss than a final boss. In conclusion, this so-called story feels like DOA 5.5 rather than DOA 6. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is my motivation for starting this video series. Starting sometime in January of next year, and in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the DOALORE series, we'll be going over the backstories and personalities of each character, explore the lore surrounding these characters, and finally, come up with reasonable story directions that can change their character development for the better in future installments. The following guest characters will not be featured and are listed as follows: Akira Yuki, Sarah Bryant, Pai Chan, Jackie Bryant, Mai Shiranui, Naotora, Kula Diamond, and Tamaki. I'm aware that some would argue that Momiji and Rachel are also guest characters being from Ninja Gaiden, but that is not true. Seeing as they're from the same in-house developer and not licensed by an outside developer, they are technically not guest characters. And even though Naotora is from a franchise and a company that has merged with Tecmo, she's never been integrated into DOALORE 5's story and is still a Koei franchise character at the end of the day. If the merger were to somehow split, it would make no difference. Tamaki was probably the trickiest omission. Even though she is from the latest Steam exclusive DOALORIVE Extreme installment, DOALORIVE Extreme Venus Vacation, evidence in DOALORIVE6 suggests that, just like Kula and Mai, she requires a license to access her quest in the quest mode, even if you unlock enough stars to get to them. This would imply that the characters that were made exclusively for DOALORIVE Extreme Venus Vacation are actually property of the publisher, DMM Games, similarly to how the characters exclusive to the Street Fighter EX series were property of Arika and not Capcom. And honestly, that kinda sucks, because they had a few interesting characters that could have worked well into the main series, most notably the small but otherworldly female Oni, Kana. And this ends my prelude video to next year's DOALORIVE Lore Explained. Now you know why I'm so passionate about making this video series next year. And hopefully, when it's all said and done, you'll be more enlightened on why the series is so appealing to the fans. It's more than just the buxom beauties, femme fatales, and pugilistic petites. It's more than just the flamboyant and fluid animation and high-quality graphics. It's more than just the breathtaking arenas, explosive danger zones, and pulling that oh-so-satisfying Izuna drop with Mr. Ninja Gaiden himself. DOA is a story about dreams and motivation, challenges and determination, failure and success, rejection and acceptance, trust and betrayal, strength and will, and of course, friends and family. Oh, who are we kidding? There's sex, violence, and gambling too, and as far as I'm concerned, DOA wouldn't be DOA without it. I'm Osmic, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you fellow DOA fans next year. Happy listening.